Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Wild and crazy stuff to talk about today. So today we're in our unit on citizenship and government. We're going to talk about two specific stories today that don't fit nice and neat in any social studies curriculum. Not only that, they're pretty complicated, so they take a while. But the two situations that we're going to talk about today, the two very important events in American history, in modern society, people are getting outraged that this isn't being taught in school. We're talking about the Wilmington Coup D'etat and the Tulsa Race Massacre. Neither one of these fit nice and neat into a curriculum because they're kind of obscure as far as the way they connect to a survey course. But in civics and economics, and the way citizens, and at this point, African Americans are full citizens of the United States in both of these stories, are treated by the government, and then the ensuing response is pretty crazy. So I want to take the time today and walk you through these stories and give you an overview of it. I could spend almost a unit on both of these, and I'm going to try to do both in the same class period here, spending most of the time on the Wilmington because it has more political consequences. But to understand how these crazy situations can take place in a modern democracy, because the democracy has not changed since these happened. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So the Wilmington Race Riot, as it is commonly called, is more commonly and more accurately probably referred to as the Coup D'etat. And a coup d'etat is where a government is like forcefully overthrown by another group. This is stuff that happens in like third world countries with weak governments. Not in America, right? It happened in Wilmington in 1898. And it's also called the Race Massacre because many African American, and the number is kind of vague, somewhere between 25 and 300. That's right, they can't get a number down to how many African Americans were murdered in this situation between 25 and 300 because nobody was keeping count because they tried to ignore it after it happened. It's wild. Let me walk you through what happens. So I got my graduate degree in history from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. So I had vaguely heard of the Wilmington Race Riot. I don't know. I mean, I assumed it was racially motivated. It was bad. That's all. I never really learned about it. In grad school, we went intricately in depth through it, and it baffled me that this was not a staple in social studies over the fact that it is a coup d'etat that overthrew an elected government is crazy. But I'm gonna walk you through it. These are some of the books that I read and where I'm getting a lot of this information from, as well as the Cape Fear Museum, which has a detailed interactive online, a detailed interactive timeline of these events as well. So I want to give them a shout out because I got a lot of the information tied in here to all these sources. All right. So we're going to start. So this is going to take place in November of 1898. But we're going to start a little earlier than that. So there is two political parties in America to come 1890s. It's the Republicans and the Democrats. Now, at the time in the 1890s, on a national scale, all right, the Republicans, all right, are in the North and the Democrats are in the South. Typically, the Republicans, that is the party of Abraham Lincoln, they ended slavery, less racist policies in the Republican Party. The Democratic Party had pretty racist policies, and they are exclusively in the South. So if you're black in the South, you're more likely going to side with the Republicans than you would the Democrats. Even though there are more white people in the South than there are black people, there is most black people in the South in the 1800s would be a Republican. All right. However, generally speaking, since there's more white people that are Democrats than black people who are the Republicans in the South, specifically North Carolina, we'll talk about here, the elections always went to the Democrats, all right, which always left African Americans usually in an inferior position because the Democrats would pass laws that would keep African Americans as second-class citizens. Well, enter the Populist Party. The Populist Party breaks off from really the Democrat Party because they didn't feel like that the Democrat Party was looking out for poor white people. And they go out and they campaign and stuff like bimetallism, trying to not have money based back on the gold standard. So in the election of 1896, 2 years before this happens, all right, this is what the map looks like, all right, that the Populist Party, all right, so all the blue is the Democrats. You can see North Carolina here is a Democratic controlled area. A lot of populists ran in this political party, but they were not happy with the outcome at all in 1896, all right, even though the Republicans won, they didn't get what they wanted. What ends up happening after 1896, and we had kind of seen this in 1894 leading to 1896, not trying to confuse you, the Populist Party starts merging with the Republicans in North Carolina, all right? Because the Democrats won and the Populist Party didn't get what they wanted, all right? So they're upset with the Democrats. So these poor white people are now going to start joining the Republicans in North Carolina. This is called the Fusionist Party. They would technically be, like when you get elected, they would be, hey, this is a Republican in the South, but it's because a lot of old Democrats that then called themselves the Populist Party are now joining with the Republicans, all right? So you have poor white people and poor black people voting together in North Carolina. The reason that is terrifying for a lot of people in North Carolina, and because of that, and because of these fusionist parties, North Carolina in 1894 and 1896 win a bunch of elections locally in North Carolina. And the Republicans, all right, starting in the 1890s, because of this fusionist party, even though they're not, the fusionists aren't, the populists aren't winning on a national level, the fusionists, when they team up with the Republicans in North Carolina, absolutely are winning. Now, this map here is really important, all right? So this is the population density of North Carolina based on race in 1890, all right? So red dots mean populations of white people, blue dots are populations of black people. There is one place that is predominantly African American in North Carolina, and it's Wilmington, North Carolina. There are more black people in Wilmington, North Carolina than there are white people. Not only that, and this is really important for today's lesson, there are affluent black people by comparison to African Americans around the country. That this is not a dirt poor population of African Americans. This is a middle class city, predominantly black, run by African Americans and white people who support African Americans in Wilmington. All right, it's the only place in North Carolina that's like this, that has the predominance of African Americans that are affluent. To show how powerful the Fusionist Party is, in 1894, Daniel Russell gets elected governor in North Carolina. He's a Republican, all right, because the Fusionists sided with him. This is great for African Americans in North Carolina because you finally have a guy in the governorship who is going to not pass as many racist laws and try to keep black people as second-class citizens. After 1896, when local positions went almost exclusively to the Fusionist Party, which is Republicans and populist poor whites that had joined the Republican Party, you have a lot of not only white people who support black rights, but black people themselves in a lot of local positions, specifically in Wilmington, but across the state as well. The response by the Democrats after 1896 realized we can't keep competing against all these dang fusionists. We got to get those people back. The people who left because of the Populist Party, those poor white people that left because of the Populist Party, we need to get them back. Now, are we going to change our policies and like help them out financially like they wanted? No, that would be complicated. How about we just find the difference between the poor white people and the poor black people that are in the Fusionist Party and divide them? So starting in 1896, the motivation by the Democrats, and I'm not saying this lightly, I want to clarify this, is a white supremacy campaign leading up to the 1898 elections. The way you pull the poor white people away from the Republicans is you talk about white unity, white supremacy. While you're talking about how great white people are, you gotta simultaneously vilify the African Americans in society and talk about how Negro rule is the worst possible thing that could ever happen and how it's destroying society. And this is what takes place in the papers. It is a us versus them, white versus black. All right? Leading up to the 1898 elections. And it gets crazy. The worst part about this whole thing is this is going to be effective. The populists, the poor white people, are going to leave the Republican Party and they're going to come over to the Democrat Party because of this white supremacy campaign. So, and it's a national thing. This is not just like in Wilmington. We're going to specifically talk about the stories in Wilmington because Wilmington is unique in North Carolina, but it is a national thing. Really, the kickoff to this whole white supremacy campaign deals with an instance where this woman, Miss Rebecca Felton, gives a speech in Georgia. In the speech, Felton declares, if it needs lynching to protect women's dearest possession from the ravaging human beast, then I say lynch 1,000 times a week if necessary. She is literally saying, go murder African Americans to protect white women. Because you can't have black women and white women in a relationship. And the only way to prevent that is murder these evil African American men by lynching. Well, this speech is reprinted and shows up in Wilmington in 1898. So Wilmington has a African American newspaper run by a man named Alexander Manley. Now Alexander Manley is an African American. Even though I understand, based on this picture, that does not seem to be the case. But I asked this question multiple times in grad school. Alexander Manley is an African American. That's all the information I know. I'm not going to guess why he appears not to be. Just go with this. It's not the wrong picture. This is Alexander Manley, the African American editor of the Daily Record in Wilmington. So he responds with, you know what? Maybe the reason there's some African American and white women relationships is because white women fall in love with African Americans. It's not necessarily like a rape situation. Like, what are you, like, they're human beings. It's possible for a white woman to fall in love with an African American. That seems like a logical thing to say. Not in the 1890s. That is considered a horrible slander. And it is printed all through the newspapers in Wilmington about how horrific, like, how could you suggest such a thing? And him saying that black men and white women could fall in love together. Keep in mind, interracial marriage is literally illegal at the time. Ignites this fury by white North Carolinians against black people because how dare you have this massive injustice against the women, saying they could possibly, like, the response to logic to racism is just astronomically more racism. So this is all taking place in Wilmington. There's a lot of tension between the black community and the white community. There are still more black people in Wilmington than there are white people. However, there's this guy, Alfred Moore Waddell, who comes out and gives a speech leading up to this election in 1898 where he says, Negro domination shall henceforth be only a shameful memory to us and an everlasting warning to those who shall never again seek to revive it. Basically, white supremacist meaning. We are done letting black people and African American sympathizers run our society. We have to win this election. So the question here is, why did Democrats resort to a campaign of white supremacy in order to gain office in North Carolina in 1898? So we just talked about that in detail. It's kind of an open-ended question. But pause me, answer that completely, and we're moving on. So here's what happens. On election day, black people, after literal meetings to prevent black people from showing up to vote, that's what Waddell's meeting was about, is to intimidate black people, keep them from showing up, and it works. In the 1898 election, it is a glorious victory. This is what it says in the white newspaper for the Democrats. because the black people didn't show up to vote, and the fusionists had been pulled away from them. Basically, in every single election across the state, the fusionists and the Republicans lost, and the Democrats won. The white supremacy campaign had worked. All right. Here's where it gets bad. All right. The entire white supremacy campaign is bad enough. So people like Waddell, these politicians who had gotten everybody worked up over race and race and race, they did it to win an election. Well, guess what? You won your election. You got everybody worked up to win. Well, guess what? Once the election is over, you got them all worked up emotionally. That doesn't just go away. This is where it starts getting crazy. Not that it wasn't already. Is this motivation that you got started based on racism isn't going to stop. So literally next to we won, it is attention white men, we need to have a meeting. All right. And it says there will be a meeting of white men of Wilmington at 11 o'clock at the courthouse. At this meeting, when all the white supremacists show up, they sign something called the the White Declaration of Independence, saying they are now free from Negro rule. Now here's the thing, yeah, they won the election. But just because you win an election, it's still like 2 or 3 months before they take over and the old people will leave office. The election just tells you who's going to be the next person to take over, but they're still in office, the existing people, for like 3 months. There is fury at that. They're like, we have spoken, we want white people in charge, not black people or African American sympathizers. So an angry crowd gathers, and who do they hate most in Wilmington is Alexander Manley, that newspaper dude who said that, hey, it's possible that white people and black people could fall in love with each other. So what does this angry mob, who's still furious, they've won the election, they've had a meeting, what do now? And probably the most famous picture out of the whole thing, because this is what starts, and nobody thought to take a picture after this because it got crazy. Alexander Manley, smart, he skedaddled. He got out of town. But they show up at his newspaper building and they burn it to the ground. And then they take a picture here. Hey, look what we did. All right. Nobody here looks like they're afraid of the fact that they committed serious felonies by burning this guy's thing to the ground. So Alex Manley, he lives for another 46 years after this. But once they burn down his newspaper, everybody's high-fiving each other. And they're like, still angry. We are still angry. We got to do something about this, and it's a completely racially motivated anger, aggression, and the violence that's getting ready to take place. Now, a bunch of Democrats that just got elected, they're like, oh, cool. They're probably, honestly, because they just manipulated the masses and convince them of all these racist things, right? Not that people aren't responsible for their own racist actions, they 100% are. But the Democrats can't show up and be like, hey, let's all get along. They can't do that because the whole reason they came to power is they vilified black people. They can't now, because the campaign's over, be like, we just said that to get elected. So, these political leaders that said all these crazy stuff, Waddell does, and that's why I'm naming him here. Most of these political leaders that won writing this idea of racism kind of just sit back and be quiet because what are they going to say now? Yeah, we were lying to you the whole time and all that stuff's kind of made up, like none of that's real. They're not going to do that because that's how they came to power is on racism. They can't stand up to racists now when it gets real because they threatened violence. Now people want violence, and the same people who were threatening it that won can't very well stand up and be like, oh, we were just kidding, like, y'all are taking it too far now. We were just saying words. So the question here is, why would the Democrat officials that had just been elected not have been able to stand up and ease tensions? It appalls me. Answer that. So this is going to lead to something called a coup d'etat. It's spelled like this, an overthrow of the government. After people destroy Alexander Manley's newspaper building, they flood into the black part of town, which, again, is an affluent area, and there were some white people that got killed. There were between 25 and 300 African Americans murdered in the streets. All right? It got so wild, and this is like the day after the election, that the governor, keep in mind, the same governor that exists over all of North Carolina, all right, is still the fusionist guy who, he lost his election. He's going to be out. But he is horrified by this. So what he does to try to stop this crazy stuff is he sends in the militia. He puts Wilmington under martial law and sends in the local militia. Like, you guys go keep the peace. The problem is, while his intentions might have been good, the idea to keep the peace, to protect black people, the militia, well, they're white supremacists. Because it's an all-white militia. They show up and actually help the rioters basically shut down the black community. They have, and it's called at the time a rapid fire gun. All right, it's on the back of this wagon. It's covered in a sheet here. It's like a minigun, a machine gun. These have just come out. They bought this prior to the election. This is where people don't feel like this might have just been tensions got too high. There's some things that happen here that seem pretty planned, and it's pretty awful. They bring this. So after the militia goes in and the murdering stops for a while, and they keep everybody on lockdown, the militia continues to roll through the streets and point the machine gun at black people. Outside of churches, they sit out there. If black people want to have a meeting, they sit out there with the machine gun and point it at the group of people as they have a meeting. Pure intimidation. While this is happening, they roll up to the elected officials. And this is the part where all the awful stuff seems awful, and it truly is. The thing we're going to tell you may not seem as bad, but when you look at how our society is set up, this is the scariest long-term impact. They show up to all the elected officials who are still serving out their last 3 months, and at gunpoint force them to resign. They overthrow the rightfully elected government in Wilmington and will not let them serve out their term one after another, and they force them all out of town. There were no public executions here, but had they said no, that's exactly what would have happened. You know who becomes the new mayor of Wilmington immediately after this? Alfred Moore Waddell. The same dude who instigated it all in Wilmington to begin with. Seems an awful lot like it was a planned, organized attempt. So the question here is, how did the coup d'etat in Wilmington become one of the most un-American events ever to take place in the United States? It has to do with what they did to the politicians there after the election. What we've learned about in civics, understand why that's so catastrophic, because, well, pause me, answer that completely, and we're going to move on. So the immediate consequences of this is banishment. Anybody, basically any affluent African American, is viewed as a threat, and they are forced to leave Wilmington. All right. Most African American, when the shooting happened, they got out of Wilmington and having to go outside of Wilmington in the swamps, and they're living there for 2 weeks before white people come out like, all right, y'all can come back. We're not going to shoot you as long as you know your role. It's crazy. So any wealthy or affluent or a politician, African American or white person that's a sympathizer for African Americans were forced out of town not to return. The sheriff immediately forced to resign. The old mayor that Waddell replaces is forced to resign. He is, and the richest black man in town, a man named Thomas Miller. Both of these men are put on a train at gunpoint and told, get out of town and never come back or we'll kill you. Guys, this is America. This is America this is happening. They kick out the police chief, who was an African-American sympathizer, and any African-American police officer is immediately fired, or anybody who was a Republican and was a sympathizer for African-Americans are fired and are replaced with white supremacist Democrats who could prove that they were white supremacists. That wasn't a negative thing. That was a positive concept in Wilmington at this time period. Not only that, the firemen, anybody in the fire department, same thing, immediately fired. If you're black, you're immediately fired from the fire department, and those are given to white supremacist people as well. This complete banishment of any successful African Americans, any African Americans at any job of any importance, has a massive lasting impact in Wilmington. So this graph is based on the population, right? If you can see in 1890, all right, there are almost 4,000 more African Americans in Wilmington, which is where New Hanover County is. in Wilmington, then 10 years later, in 1900, 2 years after this, the population of African Americans is actually decreased, right? And by 1910, there is not a majority population of African Americans in Wilmington, and there never is again. From this point on, all right, Wilmington will be a predominantly white, up to present day, predominantly white city. It is not until 1972, 80 years later, in which an African American is once again elected to the city council in Wilmington. 80 years, it was predominantly black. After the Coup D'etat, 80 years before a black man is elected again. So the question here is, why do you think such a major organized event such as the Coup D'etat was not talked about for almost a year? Why do you think it was aggressively ignored in North Carolina history? Now, I mentioned a little bit, it's hard to fit in here. It's also pretty awful. There's no justification. You can't polish that one up to make it look cute. It's shocking. It's so shocking. People are like just until recently, and I say recently, within your lifetime, it was assumed that African Americans instigated this. That's right. It was until the late 90s that anybody started saying, wait a minute. I don't think black people started this. Why would we think that black people started this? Let's go do some research. And it's only here recently we're like, wait a minute. Why have we not been talking about this? Because it's bad and everybody wanted to forget about it. Even the people who did it knew it was wrong and they didn't want to talk about it. So for almost a year after this happened, it's never mentioned anywhere in North Carolina. It's not even acknowledged that these people had resigned. That's a telltale sign. Because if the people who took over thought they had done so legally, they would have told everybody. Yeah, it's a year later before the rest of the state realizes, wait, they were forced to resign? Why? We're not talking about that. Just moving on. We're happy with the way things are. And because it was a cover, we don't even know if it's between 25 or 300 people that are killed in this situation. Awful. So answer that completely, and we're moving on. So the Tulsa Race Massacre, it is worth talking about. Absolutely. You can make a lot of comparisons between the Tulsa Race Massacre and the Wilmington Race Massacre. So Tulsa's in Oklahoma, all right? And this is 1921. So it's not like everybody learned their lesson after 1898 in Wilmington. In 1921, in Tulsa, there is the affluent section of town, is the black section of town. In a place called Greenwood that is nicknamed Black Wall Street. Here are pictures of Black Wall Street. It is a very affluent section of town, probably one of the most affluent African-American communities in America. There's a white side of town and a black side of town. Black side of town is pretty affluent. Needless to say, there is dislike between the two sides, and there's racial tension. It is forcefully segregated. There ends up being an argument. Like, it's not even that complex, because it's as sad as that is. I can probably start you on the story, and you can probably end it yourself. There's an argument over, did a teenage black kid attack sexually a teenage white girl in a hotel at the elevator? All right. He is arrested. All right. And as he goes to jail, there is a white mob that shows up angry that he's there. There is a black mob that shows up from the Greenwood area to make sure this doesn't turn into a lynching. Everybody has guns. Those two groups get in an argument, and they open fire, and 2 people were killed. That is all that spark took for the white community in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921 to roll in. So look at this picture here again. Look at these pictures, how nice this community is. To roll into that side of town and turn it into this absolute war zone, all right? Over 36 African Americans are executed in the streets. And then basically the rest flee, just like Wilmington, and they're forced out of town. Present day, it has never recovered economically or financially. Same thing as Wilmington. And the Tulsa Race Massacre, also an absolute catastrophe in American history. So the question is, in your own opinion, do you think the Wilmington race riot and the Tulsa race massacre happened the same way? If the African Americans weren't more affluent than the typical minorities in America at the time? Basically, do you think the fact that they're rich played into this? And explain your thinking based on what you have learned in this course. All right, so as far as we're going to get today, that's crazy stuff. See you guys tomorrow.